Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, they infuriated the entire populace of the United States of America. And if you'll excuse my language, the idea was kill those bastards. It had to happen as far as I was concerned, because when I was first told about it in September of 44, my immediate thought was, if we are successful, we're going to bring this war to a hasty conclusion, because the Japanese will be convinced that they can't fight against that weapon. I knew what I was carrying, because at that time I was briefed in Los Alamos as to what the United States was doing about the development of such a weapon and what my role in the use of that weapon would be. I'm sitting here looking out over the nose, and I said, I'll agree, that is Hiroshima. Tom said 30 seconds. 20 seconds. He said 10 seconds. 9, 8, 7, and took it down to 1. And when he said 1, the airplane jumped. The sky lit up. It lit up with a brilliant blue light. Everything in the cockpit turned blue. And I have to tell everybody, I tasted the weapon, and it tasted like lead. We saved more lives than we took. I've never felt any different.
No nation in history had ever had such power of life and death over the human race. Having a bomb confirmed the old belief in American exceptionalism, that America had a special mission on Earth which had been wired into American minds since the time of the Puritans. This is one of the archaeological sites of a culture of self-confidence and almost unbelievable abundance, but also of self-doubt and considerable paranoia. A culture, moreover, that became imperial in fact, if not in name. In the 1950s and 60s, Americans learned to believe in the supremacy of that culture, including its art. By the 1970s, it was simply taken for granted that the center of world art was New York, as Paris had been the center in the 19th century and Rome in the 17th. Today, we're not so sure about that, but we were then. The war that had devastated Europe and Japan made America rich. It hoiked it out of the slump of the 30s. From the other side of the Atlantic, it looked huge, naive, swollen with production and pleasure. A vulgar, innocent, triumphant paradise. Seldom had there been such a misalignment between what ordinary Americans rejoiced in and what American artists felt.
As I saw it, nobody could feel lonelier than ambitious artists in New York. That feeling of being isolated and overlooked. I don't want to dramatize it, I don't want to fancy it up, but man, did they feel lonely.
The artists Greenberg was talking about, some of whom he was the first to support, would come to be known as the Abstract Expressionists, or the New York School. They would be seen as the world's leading abstract painters by the 1950s, and the idea of the supremacy of New York would ride on their work. Among them, Jackson Pollock, Willem de Kooning, Mark Rothko, Robert Motherwell, Barnett Newman. They had all grown up in Depression America, but the main influences that formed their work were not American, but European. Especially the Surrealists, some of whom had fled to New York to escape the Nazis. Max Ernst had said goodbye to the old world with this image of disaster, Europe after the rain. The presence of artists like Ernst and André Masson, with their belief in the power of the unconscious mind, inspired young Americans who needed to believe in the value of an artistic avant-garde with no reference to politics. But how to transcend the surrealist model? The artist who really seemed to have done it by his death in 1956 was Jackson Pollock, and American culture never got over its surprise at producing him. Pollock was born in the West, in Wyoming, and the sense of large space, of epic landscape, had enormous meaning to his work as an adult. You can see the traces of Picasso and André Masson in this painting. It's abstract, but not so abstract, and the beginnings of his all-over style are showing up in its furious congestion of signs and scribbles. Pollock underwent Jungian analysis. He was obsessed with the idea of the primal, the primitive. He was also influenced by the art of Navajo Indian painters who made their designs by pouring colored sand on the ground. It suggested a whole other relation to the canvas. You could get into it, be part of it.
I don't work from drawings or color sketches. My painting is direct. I usually paint on the floor. I enjoy working on a large canvas. I feel more at home, more at ease in a big area. Having the canvas on the floor, I feel nearer, more a part of the painting. This way I can walk around it, work from all four sides, and be in the painting. I can control the flow of the paint. There is no accident, just as there is no beginning and no end. Sometimes I lose a painting, but I have no fear of changes, of destroying the image. Because a painting has a life of its own, I try to let it live.
Journalists derided Pollock as Jack the Dripper, a man out of control, but the mark of his greatest all-over canvases like this one was their amazing balance. Between, on one hand, the spiderweb of shallow space, so transparent to the eye, so nuanced in its energy, and on the other hand, the surface, with its crusts and puddles and blots of pigment. It's utterly abstract, and yet it makes you think of nature, and that too was part of Pollock's ambition. He said that he wanted to be nature, not just paint it. Anyone who thinks that American modernism doesn't have its religious aspect should come here, see the light, and be converted. This is the studio once used by Jackson Pollock and Lee Krasner in the village of Springs on Long Island. It has since been preserved as a shrine. None of Pollock's actual paintings are here, but instead you have the holy coffee cans, the miraculous brushes, and the sanctified shoes. I don't know whether young artists come here in search of transformation. Poof, you're a genius, but nothing is impossible. In any case, this is the Sanctum Sanctorum, whose floor preserves the drips left by the master, the ones that went off the edges of the canvas. In 1949, Life magazine splashed Pollock's work across several pages, echoing Greenberg's bold claim that he was the best living American artist. Never before had the American mass media latched onto an abstract painter. It made him a national celebrity. Pollock's legend remains obstructive. The doomed, hard-drinking artist who died at age 44 driving with two girls in a big American car on Long Island, the puffy James Dean of American art. Artists, however, have looked to Pollock ever since as a kind of talisman. He was immensely influential. He broke the ice, said Willem de Kooning. He created a new scale for American painting, a fresh idea of surface and touch, a new kind of space. But if you ask where the deeper appeal of his work lies, part of the answer has to be its American romanticism, its sense of the presence of an epic landscape, the memory of links between man and nature in the new world that had infused American art 100 years before. Abstract expressionism had its theological side, a yearning for transcendent experience that would go beyond the things of this world. Mark Rothko was obsessed with the idea of an abstract art that would carry the full weight of religious meaning. In the 40s, he had looked for what he called tragic and timeless subject matter. Now the subject was gone, and the format was that of landscape. Hovering oblongs of colour, moody blurs stacked vertically up the canvas. It's the silence and pervasive light of 19th century luminism on a much bigger scale. Rothko had an exquisite sense of colour and of formal nuance, especially along the edges of his shapes. But the hope that this, or any other abstract art, could carry the tragic weight of King Lear or the moral elevation of the Old Testament was bound to fail, though many people thought he had succeeded, an idea that got hoisted into myth by Rothko's suicide in 1970. The belief in sublime awe that inflated so much writing about abstract expressionism was part of a period style. The feeling that artists and the critics who backed them were locked in a high-stakes struggle with the whole history of past art. Did everything the abstract expressionists painted live up to the rhetoric about it? Well, of course not. Nothing could. Big claims were made for these artists, and one or two of them, like Clifford Still or Barnett Newman, made them for themselves. These are Barnett Newman's Stations of the Cross, which now have their own room in the National Gallery of Washington. As documents of early minimalism, they're not without interest, but as a narrative of the passion and suffering of Jesus Christ, they're utterly absurd. Newman once said, "I thought our quarrel was with Michelangelo." Well, bad luck, Barney. You're lost. Just as Pollock renewed American painting, so David Smith in the 1950s reinvented American sculpture. True to his name, he worked mainly with welded iron. But like Pollock, his work played off landscape, whether as a background, as here, or as an image in the work. As stuff to make sculpture out of, iron didn't have a long history like marble or bronze. It was industrial. It spoke of the machine age, its direct power, its structure, balance, mobility and variety. All of that was in Smith's work. "Oh, David," said Bob Motherwell, his friend, grieving after Smith's death in 1965, "you were as delicate as Vivaldi and as strong as a Mack truck." And so he was. The idea of welding steel into sculpture came from two Spaniards, Julio González and Pablo Picasso. Smith loved the directness of welding, which rivaled the directness of painting. He was a user-up of discarded things, a collagist in 3 dimensions. His work was an inspired fusion of the formal elements of Cubism with the imagery of Surrealism. Even cast-off tools went into the work, for their own sake as form and as a tribute to the act of making. Smith grew up with American industry. As a child, he had played around factories and railroad yards. Big American metal was nature to him. He wanted all his work to be at human scale. It's seldom bigger than a body, and sometimes it looks like one, a personage, a totem. If Smith often evoked the body, Willem de Kooning wouldn't leave it alone. It pervaded his work. A tangled, dirty cream image of what? Bodies, is the short answer, but not whole ones. Forms slipping and jostling against one another, the line creating memories of limbs, butts, elbows, and every inch full of energy. This painting is arguably the best one of his career. There's even what appears to be a set of floating teeth, the dentures that his woman would soon be sporting.
I just wanted to make it easy for myself to put something right in the center of the canvas. Like it had 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth, and arms and feet. I had a lot of mouth cuts out of magazines. And I noticed that when I had something, a photographic image like this, the mouth, it gave me a point of reference. It was something to hold on to. I pasted it on and there was a shock. Then I knew where I had to go. And then of course a woman's mouth is very appealing. It is interesting though that I could only do it with a woman. I guess it's because I'm not a woman.
De Kooning's work had a way of annoying the critics who wanted it to be more abstract than it was. The ghosts of Baroque figure painting kept jogging his elbow. He was, after all, a Dutchman, an illegal alien who jumped ship into America in 1926 from the same country as Rubens and Frans Hals, where he'd been thoroughly trained in figure drawing. Hence, the women he continued to paint from the 1950s on. The eyes of Woman 1 glare at you like a pair of black headlamps. She has the worst overbite in all Western art. She's imposing and commonplace and full of a power which flows from the slashing brushstrokes into her body. called himself a slipping glimpser, open to a constant stream of impressions, visual slang and high art, pin-up girls, but Manet too. High and low, everywhere. And how couldn't you love what highbrows called the low? The great symbol of America's new post-war life was that emblem of passion, freedom and innovation, the automobile. Their all-image packed with the symbolism of sex and power. They have the tails of rockets and chromium breasts like Jane Mansfield, and when you hit the brakes, the rear end lights up like a robot animal in heat. Ultramatic ride, Dynaflow penetration, triumph, lust, aggression, and tons of room for the whole family. The siren song of Imperial America.
The parade of new cars starts across the stage among the dancing motorettes.
Car commercials of the 50s are fascinating because they're constantly showing a car on a pedestal as though it were David Smith at an art exhibition, only the difference would be that the camera would then rotate around the car so that you could see all these insanely wonderful angles. This is as spiky as any abstract expressionist composition. I'm sure that's what tail fins are all about.
In the 1950s, Americans put 20% of their gross national product into cars, and they owned 3 out of every 4 cars in the world. These were the ideal. People who believed in good, virtuous Bauhaus design and environmental responsibility hated these gorgeous, gas-guzzling dreamboats then, and they still do. They're a world away from the demure Beetle or the virtuous Volvo. Nothing like them is ever going to be built again. They're the rolling Baroque public sculpture of an America that's gone forever. And it wasn't just cars. The war was over, rationing was gone, and the cornucopia of American industry tooled up, tipped and released a flood of styling. Gaudy, lush, avocado-coloured and hot pink, chrome everything and big. Luxury for the masses. These were the signs of capitalist paradise, and they had a political message. To a trade fair in Moscow in 1959, America sent an ideal kitchen. Richard Nixon took the Russian Premier Nikita Khrushchev through it, saying, "Look, this is what the American housewife has." And Khrushchev lost his temper, shouting, "These things are mere gadgets, they don't count." But they did count, even though most of the American intelligentsia would have agreed with Khrushchev. The Cold War had been running at full heat for 10 years by then. It had brought national paranoia to both Russia and America, and in its grip of fear and self-assertion, all symbols of American identity got a new charge, including, most obviously, the flag, which Americans are so given to flying, parading, displaying, and saluting. No other nation treats its flag the way that Americans treat the Stars and Stripes. On the one hand, it's a peculiarly sacred object. You must handle it with care, you must salute it, you must never allow it to touch the ground. To burn or deface it is a supercharged political act, and right-wingers are always wanting a constitutional amendment to punish such indignities. But on the other hand, they make jeans and knickers out of it, and they use it to advertise everything from gas stations to hot dog stands. The American flag is an abstraction, the most recognized abstraction in the world. Americans still argue about what it means, but they all know what it is. Is a picture of an abstraction a representation? Is this a flag or a painting? would sometime scorn the truth, which is that one night I dreamed I painted a large American flag, and the next morning I got up and I went out and bought materials to begin it. It's a very rotten painting because I began it in enamel paint, and it wouldn't dry quick enough, and then I had in my head this idea, something I had read, I heard, I don't know what, about wax in caustic. And I changed in the middle of the painting to that because the encaustic just has to cool, and then it's hard and you don't blur it again.
Johns's flags were first-class conundrums, brain teasers carrying the questions about art that had been posed earlier by the surrealist René Magritte and the Dadaist Marcel Duchamp, but never put quite so sharply in an American context before.
My Aunt Gladys once taught me about it, since she was so proud of me because she had worked so hard to instill some respect for the American flag in her students, and she was so glad that the mark had been left. Oh, me.
Nobody has yet laid down his life for one of Johns's flags. Collectors, however, have laid down millions of dollars. Johns's paintings of targets seem just as banal and just as mysterious as the flags. A target is like a painting in one way. It's a thing you look at, focus your attention on. But there the resemblance ends. You shoot at targets. You use them as a game or in training for war. Maybe in looking at these targets, one should remember the times they were made in. The era of the Cold War, with America's fear of atomic apocalypse and its suspicion of the enemy within, the commie spy, the homosexual.
Are you a member of the Communist Party? Or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
It's unfortunate and tragic that I have to teach this committee for Americanism for many years, and I
stand away from the stand.
Fight for the Bill of Rights, which was destroyed.
Stand away from the stand.
You may be in your schoolyard playing when the signal comes. That signal means to stop whatever you are doing and get to the nearest safe place fast. Always remember, the flash of an atomic bomb can come at any time.
A paranoid image suggesting threat to the defenseless or evasive subject, the eye of power hunting out what is concealed. But some artists lived entirely in a world of reverie, untouched by public images. Poet of the city, heir to surrealism and master of scale, Joseph Cornell. He lived a reclusive life in a frame house on Utopia Parkway in Queens, and he went scavenging for relics of the past in New York junk shops and flea markets. In his fixation on a dream Europe that he could never actually bring himself to visit, Cornell was deeply American. He sorted his finds into their eccentric categories and stored them with his mementos, like love letters to movie stars that he'd never met. And from them he made boxes, each a world in miniature, where an enormous moon peers in through the window at its relative, a cork ball. A world of very fragile things, like glasses and old clay pipes. A melancholy nostalgia for places he'd never been, Victorian travellers' hotels. A fugitive beauty whose emblem was the caged bird. And all contained in the strict tiny architecture that excludes sentimentality. Another scavenger of genius who took off from Cornell on the big scale was Robert Rauschenberg. He did more than anyone else to break down the barriers between painting, sculpture, performance, dance. Rauschenberg treated the canvas as flypaper for the world's images, and at first for the things themselves. 40 years later, this bed still carries quite a charge, an early American quilt that seems to have been the site of an axe murder, the paint slathered and crusty and fierce, a manifesto of impurity. He's an inconsistent artist, restless even, but with spurts of dazzling invention.
Well, part of the message.
Neatly. I can't tell when I spill.
Whoa.
Wandering around strange places, looking in every corner, I don't know, keeps you refreshed.
Yeah, I guess it must. Because you can bring back all sorts of solidified memories from the places you go to. And then they surprise you when they come out of the...
Well, it's all very different. Once it gets to be a photograph, and then it gets blown up, and then it's a silk screen, and then color follows, and then there's a juxtaposition of imagery that is hopefully non-logical.
When you called that early piece Rebus, which means a kind of puzzle, I think,
right,
were you really stressing the idea of a work about being a puzzle whose solution the viewer has to work towards?
I just collected a bunch of old posters or signs and tried to make them as diverse as possible, and the colors supposedly was the key about how they were to be read, but the whole thing was fantasy.
So you do establish these kinds of...
You do. Those are your experiences.
No, you're drawing the pictures, Doctor.
Yes, but you're the one who has all the references because of your experience.
And so you're happy to let people make them up as they go along?
I insist on it.
By 1962, Rauschenberg was pulling the images of things into his paintings by means of silkscreen, news photos mainly, records of current events, the flux of the media. He wanted to create a new sort of history painting on the old panoramic scale.
I've been to probably no fewer than a dozen of the Apollos and the shuttle shots, and it's always excited me. And there's hope in that tremendous surge of energy and the sound that liftoff makes. That it's not of this world.
There's a very strong feeling that America is presenting you suddenly with this flow of images which are really, really strong and in some way unprecedented. The space program, Kennedy, all this. Did you feel that you were living in really exceptional times when you were doing this?
Well, I had to be aware of that. I mean, I certainly couldn't have done that work
under Nixon or nearly anybody else. It's not the dramatic drive and the imagination that's ever reoccurred since that period. I had just invested in 6-foot silk screens of Kennedy with the hand.
With the pointing finger?
Yes. And in that context, he was like authority, the president, and no, he was not authority, he was not president, he was a dead tragedy.
Kennedy's death wasn't only a colossal blow to American self-confidence. It was one of the watersheds from which the present fragmentation of American society flowed.
I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation.
The 1960s brought one of the greatest moral struggles in American history, the Civil Rights Movement. Some black writers in the process rose from national to international fame, among them James Baldwin and Richard Wright, the novelists. And yet the visual arts seemed strangely silent on the subject of black identity and experience. Why? Because white artists, critics, collectors, the whole art world in fact, good liberals to the last man, tended to regard blacks as a kind of social abstraction. Romeo Bearden's collages of life in the South and in Harlem set out to change this. They are among the greatest expressions of African-American culture. They belong with the work of Duke Ellington and Earl Hines in music, or Alvin Ailey in dance. As an artist, Bearden was not a cultural separatist, and he never bought the line that art had to be abstract to matter. It could report on its place, its time, its people. He drew on Picasso, on Matisse, even on Dutch genre painting, whatever was useful. And on African art as well, cycling the forms of masks and statues back into the living Harlem that was all around him.
He was in Harlem after all. The 1920s saw the birth of jazz, and that aesthetic was very much a part of the way that he saw. And he found a way, I think unlike any other African-American artist before him, of representing that aesthetic visually. He found a visual language for an aesthetic which we had experienced mostly in verbal and musical forms through great attainments in African-American music. Well, Bearden found a way to encapsulate that aesthetic visually, and his collage technique is the closest visual analog to jazz rhythms and improvisation that I at least have encountered.
To be an American was to have too much most of the time. It was to live in a permanent inflation of desire.
The English invented the sandwich, and then they did nothing with it for 200 years. A miserable flap of bread with a little smear of mustard on a transparent piece of ham. Pathetic. Not here. Turkey, corned beef, Swiss cheese, roast beef, American cheese, pastrami. The only problem being, as the conquistadors said on the edge of the Grand Canyon, how do you get down into it? Sandwich as metaphor.
American artists had rejoiced in the mythic bigness of their country. It was one of the great themes of the 19th century. And then, in the late 50s and 60s, they began to get into the bigness of ordinary life. The artist who latched onto this aspect of America, so weird to the foreigner, was Claes Oldenburg. He was the best of the pop artists in the 1960s, and pop art, as Andy Warhol said, was about liking things.
I think there are many types of American food, but the sort of food that I was using here was the simpler forms that had a kind of architecture, and they're found in very simplified fast food. The hamburger is a perfectly structural piece of food, and I think I'd almost rather look at it than eat it, you know, but it is fun. It's got three circles, and if you put an onion on it, you have even more variation, and then a pickle is even more variation, and so on. So it's very often a structure which is covered with a very textured surface.
In 1961, Oldenburg moved into a store on the Lower East Side and began to fill it with things. The store was a parody of an art gallery, nothing but a shop with art in it. Out of cheap, sleazy materials, plaster, rags, shiny paint, and junk, he made shoes, shirts, stockings, knickers, all unwearable, all absurd.
Almost all of the works can be related to the body in some way because they're objects handled by a human being, so they relate to the feeling of a human being. And then they also are imagined, they stimulate the imagination of human beings. So they all the objects refer to human experiences.
Americans were the first people to completely adapt to mass advertising. It bombarded them with thousands of messages a day. It shaped their dreams. It interrupted their landscapes, and it helped form their cities. Its monumental form was the billboard, and one artist got his training by painting them high above Times Square.
I was working as a sign painter in the Union in Times Square, and I'd paint a huge 60-foot-long glass of beer, beautifully, with bubbles and the right yellow and everything. And the salesman would come in and says, "James, that beer doesn't have enough hops in it." He said, "You got to change it." "What do you mean? What do I know from hops?" He says, "Well, make it a little lighter." I made it 1,000th degree lighter, the whole damn thing. That's good, it passes. Next day, paint an arrow shirt 20 feet high. "James, the collar looks dirty, you got to change the collar. You got dirty shirt, they're not going to pass it." So I had all this color. I had Ford Seafoam green. I had dirty beer color, the wrong hops. I had dirty arrow shirt collar. I took that paint home and made abstract paintings, and only I knew that this was the wrong color. Then it dawned on me, why don't I try to make a mysterious painting by doing enlarged fragments, and the largest fragment would be hardest to see and therefore be mysterious. So Lawrence Alloway came along and he called it pop art because the artists loved their images so much.
In In I Love You With My Ford, a woman's dreaming face rises from a sea of orange spaghetti, a Pollock in pasta, to kiss the grill of a Detroit car. Generally, there's no politics in Rosenquist Fantasies of Desire, but in 1965 he produced an exception to that, an enormous panorama about Vietnam called the F-111, the name of a strategic bomber.
It was panels covered with aluminum. Over the surface of that I used Italian wallpaper rollers to give an idea of nuclear fallout and so forth. And there was a runner's hurdle, so one was hurtling oneself into a blind spot. Then a Angel Foods cake that was a metaphor for a missile silo. Above that is a Firestone snow tire that had this tough-looking design of industry. And I thought of this plane going through all this flak of household items, light bulbs, nuclear imagery, things during peacetime. A little girl, blonde hair under a hairdryer, as the pilot of this bomber, like an aviatrix. And then on to a rendering of a hydrogen bomb in a red grisaille with an umbrella over it, with snow and the umbrella, like a view from a resort onto a nuclear bomb. Then a underwater swimmer with a gulp of air going to the surface, which was like the air missing in Dresden during the bombing. Then a field of Franco-American spaghetti.
The F-111 summed up Rosenquist's vision of America as an Eden compromised by its own violence. The 60s were also a time of the face and the flashbulb, the great American fixation on celebrity, disposable renown that gripped the culture as never before. It would get its artist laureate in Andy Warhol, who fastened his own identity to the identicality of American glut. Andy Warhol did most of his best work over a span of 6 years, finishing in 1968 when he was shot. And most of it was connected to one central insight, which was that in a culture of raw data, where most people experience most things through a scrim of media stereotypes, the affectless artist has a place. You didn't need to be hot and earnest anymore. You could be super cool, like a slightly frosted mirror. Andy Warhol didn't sit down and work that out. He knew it in his bones. He understood it instinctively. He was a conduit for a kind of collective American state of mind whose idea of sacredness is celebrity, and his themes are death and fame. On the one hand, you had the icons of publicity. The film stars, Liz, Marilyn, Elvis, the face of Jackie Kennedy, who double and quadruple and multiply like images of the saints at the hands of a Polish Catholic boy who was utterly fascinated by their aura and remoteness and pervasiveness. The production of fame was an American industry, and everything to do with it mesmerized him.
Oh, this is so glamorous. You don't have to do anything. Just what you're doing.
Knowing that America makes all its children want to be famous, no matter how dull they may actually be, he produced endless hours of unwatchable film about the doings of his circle of friends and hangers-on in his studio known as The Factory. Later, he expanded this into a silkscreen portrait service for genuine and wannabe celebrities, a cosmetic operation that stripped the idea of social portraiture down to its bare chassis. Silence, his deadpan lack of affect, became a Rorschach blot onto which a hot culture could project its curiosity about artists. Here he is with his dealer, Ivan Karp, and an interviewer who was getting nowhere.
Well, this is something that people wouldn't see every day, that something that is so familiar it's become invisible to them. So why did you decide to paint the electric chair?
But he did know, of course, and so does anyone who sees these bare, mute, grainy images. The dark side of Warhol was the most interesting one, maybe the only interesting one. He was truly mesmerized by death, American death, whether inflicted by the state or simply by random accident. Over and over again, he silkscreened photos of it, as Suicide's body crashed on the roof of a car in baroque swirls of black and white. A car burning in suburbia with its driver hanging from a telegraph pole. Goya he wasn't, not by a million miles, but in these paintings he was true to his experience and to his voyeuristic nature, and that gave them a grip that his more frivolous and routine stuff, now that he too is dead, no longer has. And that is true of his Gold Marilyn as well. Suicide, drag queen, Madonna, all rolled into one.
Not only was Marilyn Monroe dead when Warhol painted it, but the whole world she stood for was dead. That kind of peroxide sex bomb movie glamour has more to do with the gleaming chrome on a 1957 Cadillac than it does with the Volkswagen of 1959 or the squared-off Lincoln Continental that Kennedy was shot in, which was a black box in 1963. It's a past style, and it therefore has the kind of stink of death on it, and that there is not just the fact that Marilyn is dead, but also the sense that a lot of the consumer culture they represented had the sense of something passing on it. There was something elegiac about what they did with consumer culture.
The end of the 60s looks like archaeology today, and who believes any more in the binding power of national fetishes of prestige like the space program? Not even the amazing feat of putting Americans on the moon could altogether convince other Americans that all was well on Earth.
John Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy, all dead, assassinated. The war in Vietnam stalled and perhaps unwinnable. Huge splits of race and gender, class and belief were opening in the American polity, and the clamp of the Cold War could no longer hold them together. Perhaps it never had been as easy to be an American as many Americans thought.
Visit American Visions at PBS Online and further explore the American experience through art at the address on your screen.